do you think you are to dare argue with the police?" A hateful shout tore through the cold, hollow space of the airport like a slap across the face of anyone who still believed in justice. Evelyn Monroe, an elegant black woman, was simply standing there waiting to board with her first-class ticket, suddenly becoming the target of a witch hunt fueled by the malicious gaze of a white lady. No evidence, no explanation. 2 police officers rushed in, faces cold as ice, handcuffing her as if she were a dangerous criminal. The crowded terminal was full of people, yet all of them turned away, pretending not to see, letting Evelyn be dragged away like discarded trash. No one spoke up, no one intervened. Justice was crushed under the boot of blatant indifference and shameless racism. Evelyn Monroe, with her hands shackled and her head held high, was not the kind of person who would accept defeat. Just a few hours later, those who had once looked down on her were trembling on their knees, begging for forgiveness they did not deserve. But apologies mean nothing when dignity has been mercilessly trampled. You think you have seen injustice? This story will make you realize the truth is far more brutal. You think this only happens somewhere else? Which state are you living in? The airport on a late Friday afternoon was a chaotic mix of sounds and images, as if the city's every beat converged into one final point before dispersing into the sky. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with expensive perfume and the cold metallic scent characteristic of airplanes. On the electronic board, rows of red and green letters danced constantly, signaling a world in motion. Non-stop. At gate B12, where Atlantic Airlines Flight 788 was preparing for takeoff to Chicago, a long line of passengers waited. Some stared at their phones. Others folded up their morning newspapers or took the last bite of a hurriedly bought sandwich. Among them stood a black woman, positioned near the front of the priority boarding line. In the quieter business-class check-in area, with tall glass walls and soft yellow lighting reflecting off polished wooden floors, Evelyn Monroe stood waiting for her turn. She wore a simple orange suit, no jewelry, her hair tied up neatly. Beside her, a silver Rimowa suitcase added to her calm and professional presence. In her hand was an open iPad Pro, displaying documents she was scanning one last time before heading home. Evelyn wasn't accompanied by an assistant, nor did she have bodyguards or security, something federal judges often have. She often avoided that visibility to experience life as normally as possible, like the people she once represented in court. Not far from her stood Clarissa Whitmore, a white woman in her 60s. Her outfit was a parade of social class signals. A Chanel coat, diamond necklace, Dior sunglasses perched atop voluminous hair that looked styled specifically for showing off. Clarissa didn't just stand, she occupied a position. The way she checked her watch, flipped her hair, sighed, everything signaled that she believed she deserved to be served before anyone else. Clarissa's gaze swept over the crowd, then stopped at the black woman. The first time was a glance. The second, a pause. By the third, she couldn't hide the discomfort clearly marked in her brow, as if the woman's presence disrupted the carefully arranged image of who should be standing in the business class line. No one heard exactly what Clarissa said to her companion, a younger woman who appeared to be an assistant, but the frown and murmured words like "can understand" and "the world's upside down" began to ignite something. The black woman, whose name, as the world would later learn, was Evelyn Monroe, remained still, eyes fixed on her tablet screen. There was no sign she noticed the glares from behind, but perhaps someone who has lived long enough within the system knows sometimes the safest response is to pretend you didn't see. Behind the counter, a young airport employee stood, clearly nervous, as Clarissa approached with a face that suggested she was about to file a formal complaint against the entire airport. Clarissa's voice was just loud enough for nearby people to hear, but laced with deliberate emphasis. "I don't feel comfortable standing in line with people like that." She looked at me, at my luggage. Who knows if she even belongs in business class? You should check. The employee froze, visibly unsure how to respond to a complaint with no real basis from someone cloaked in the full authority of social status. It only lasted a few minutes, but in those minutes, prejudice, like fine dust in the air, found something to cling to. Not far off, a young man was adjusting his phone to live stream his very first flight. He accidentally panned the camera toward gate B12, capturing the moment a woman was asked to step out of line for no clear reason. He didn't know yet. He had just hit record on the beginning of a storm. Evelyn Monroe stayed silent, but if anyone looked closely, they'd see her hand gripping the tablet just a bit tighter, not from fear, but from habit. A practiced calm when facing what should never have happened. And Clarissa stood there, her face a mixture of petty satisfaction and entitled power. As for those around them, they did what society had taught them long ago: stay still, avoid trouble, and pretend it's just another normal day. Clarissa Whitmore was not one to wait. For her, time had to obey, and today, when the diamond watch on her wrist was just over 5 minutes off what she considered the standard boarding time, that delay became an insult. No one had the right to force her to stand in line, especially not alongside those she believed did not belong there. Her gaze swept across the gate B12 area and settled on a black woman standing ahead, quietly studying her tablet with a calm demeanor that challenged Clarissa. That woman, Evelyn Monroe, did not turn her head or respond to Clarissa's look. Evelyn's calmness, rather than easing the tension, only added fuel to the burning irritation within Clarissa. She couldn't bear the idea that someone dared to stand in the same priority line as her and acted so nonchalant, as if they were equals. Clarissa stepped forward, brushed aside her meticulously styled hair, and then let out an audible sigh, just loud enough to draw attention while maintaining her air of superiority. Her gaze lingered on Evelyn, as if to assert that her presence was out of place. Evelyn had sensed that look from the very first moments. Having endured thousands of trials and faced every kind of gaze, from skepticism to hostility, she immediately understood the meaning behind Clarissa's look. It wasn't one of curiosity, it was an assessment, a prejudice encapsulated in that sharp, cold glance. Yet she did not turn, she simply continued scrolling on her tablet, as if that look wasn't worth her concern. Then, the moment arrived, when the young check-in attendant turned to Clarissa with a professional smile meant to ease the situation. Clarissa tilted her head, feigning a polite smile in return. But immediately afterward, she suddenly flicked her tongue toward Evelyn, a swift, contemptuous gesture loaded with meaning. The action happened in an instant, subtle enough that outsiders might miss it. Yet it did not escape Evelyn's notice. She saw it clearly, and the finger gliding over the tablet paused for a moment. That was the only reaction she allowed herself, not out of fear, but because she knew the rules. If she reacted too soon, she would fall into the trap people like Clarissa always set, the image of an angry, belligerent black woman, exactly as the stereotypes dictated. But Clarissa did not stop. She advanced to the check-in counter, her voice raised louder than necessary, carrying the confidence of someone used to preferential treatment. She asked, unable to hide her displeasure, why she had to stand in line with all sorts of people. The young attendant, looking momentarily flustered, replied that this was the priority line for business-class passengers and that everyone present was eligible. Yet, Clarissa was not satisfied with that answer. She sneered, her tone dripping with sarcasm, and asked if the attendant was sure that the woman actually held a business-class ticket, an insinuation directed at Evelyn with a look full of suspicion. At that moment, Evelyn slowly closed her tablet and turned to look straight at Clarissa. Without frowning or showing anger, her calm, sharp gaze lasted long enough for Clarissa to feel its weight. That look carried no hint of defiance. It was as if Clarissa herself were on trial. Taken aback by that reaction, Clarissa stepped back half a step, and her smile suddenly stiffened. Evelyn then spoke, her voice deep and clear, every word carefully chosen. She asked if she had done anything to offend Clarissa. The question was not accusatory, rather, it was an invitation for Clarissa to reflect on her own behavior. But Clarissa responded with a loud, unnatural laugh, as if trying to hide her discomfort. She said she was merely surprised that in this day and age anyone could buy a business-class ticket. Wasn't that so? Those words, though wrapped in a veneer of politeness, clearly exposed her prejudice. The atmosphere at gate B12 grew heavy. A few passengers began to take notice, their gazes flicking over Evelyn and Clarissa before moving on. A middle-aged man standing behind Evelyn leaned forward slightly, as if straining to listen, while the check-in attendant bowed her head, avoiding everyone's eyes, clearly not wanting to be drawn into this tense situation. Evelyn smiled faintly, a smile just enough to maintain a congenial atmosphere, yet sharp enough to retort. She said that indeed the world had broadened, and that more and more people were now capable of flying business class, just like her. Her words, though gentle, carried the weight of a declaration. She not only had the right to stand there, but she was equal to anyone, including Clarissa. Clarissa was about to retort, but then, as though seizing an opportunity to regain control of the situation, she changed her approach. With the confidence of someone accustomed to wielding influence, she waved her hand to call 2 patrolling police officers. 2 men in dark uniforms strode over, their steps stiff and exuding an air of authority and order. Clarissa turned around, her voice immediately shifting to a worried tone. As if she were the victim, she claimed she didn't feel safe because the woman was staring at her and her luggage suspiciously. She demanded that the officers conduct a check. The airport employee was about to speak, perhaps to clarify the situation, but the older officer only gave a sidelong glance, a look sufficient to render her silent. He nodded to Clarissa as if her words were all that was needed to take action, and Evelyn, standing there, realized that the game had officially begun. A game she had not chosen, but one she had no intention of losing. No alarm sounded at gate B12. No announcements, no emergency buttons pressed, no screaming or signs of violence. But like a reflex honed over time in an environment where a glance or a skin tone could be reason enough, 2 airport security officers appeared. They walked over, not rushing, but with the quiet confidence of men who knew their presence alone carried authority. Calvin Rourke, the older officer, led the way. His face was weathered, with deep lines etched not just by age but by years of viewing the world with suspicion, as if everything could hide a threat. Beside him was Troy Maddox, younger, solidly built, his eyes flickering between curiosity and resentment. Maddox had the telltale demeanor of someone who had yet to learn the difference between granted authority and self-imposed power. Clarissa Whitmore noticed their arrival before Evelyn could even make sense of what was happening. Her face lit up, as if she'd just found the key to winning a game she had started herself. She didn't need to shout or make any harsh demands. She simply turned, lowered her voice just enough to sound concerned while maintaining an air of refinement. She said she felt uneasy because the woman had been staring at her luggage, that she didn't know what the woman was doing there. Her words never mentioned skin color, but the implication was sharp and clear, like an invisible blade. Rourke didn't look at Clarissa for long. He was used to these kinds of complaints, and throughout his career, he'd believed far too many of them without checking. Just one glance at Evelyn, and he'd already reached an initial conclusion, a conclusion not based on evidence, but on deeply ingrained prejudice. He checked the name tag on his chest, as if to remind himself of his authority, then walked straight toward Evelyn. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't back away, even as a familiar instinct stirred within her. She'd seen looks like Rourke's before, in boardrooms, courtrooms, or even bookstores, when a security guard would coincidentally trail her. She knew that look wasn't meant to inquire. It was meant to confirm something already assumed. Rourke stopped just a stride away from her, posture rigid but voice deliberately soft. He asked her to step out of the line for a private conversation. His words weren't a request, but an order, dressed in polite phrasing. Evelyn turned to face him, locking eyes. Her voice was calm but firm. She asked what the conversation was about. Rourke replied that there had been a complaint from another passenger, that she was causing unease. Evelyn, still composed, asked if standing quietly in line could really be considered threatening behavior. Rourke didn't answer that directly. Instead, he asked for her ID and boarding pass. His tone was steady, but with the finality of someone who wouldn't entertain discussion. Maddox, standing slightly behind and to the side, watched with growing impatience. In his mind, Evelyn was obviously hiding something. To Maddox, a woman like her, even dressed neatly, didn't belong in the business class priority line. He'd seen this before. Imposters, trying to slip into places they didn't. Evelyn reached into her bag, pulled out her ID and business class boarding pass. Her name, Evelyn M. Monroe. Everything was valid, nothing out of order. Rourke took the documents, glanced at them, then looked back at her. His eyes lingered on the Patek Philippe watch on her wrist, an accessory not often seen on people he considered ordinary, but instead of questioning the documents, he asked something else. His voice dropped, laced with unconcealed suspicion. What was her occupation? The question sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. It wasn't about verifying her identity. It was a test, a way to judge whether she was worthy of the business class ticket in her hand. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she held Rourke's gaze, then glanced at Maddox before turning her eyes to the flight display board. She replied that she didn't believe she was required to provide that information, as she had already presented valid documentation. Maddox clicked his tongue, stepping closer, inserting himself into the exchange. His voice was thick with sarcasm as he asked why she was hesitant if she had nothing to hide. Evelyn answered, still calm, that she wasn't hesitant. She was asking to be treated fairly, like any other passenger. Maddox rolled his eyes, saying they had the right to question anything that seemed suspicious. Evelyn, unwavering, asked what exactly seemed suspicious. Maddox didn't pause. "Your attitude," he said, "that's what." The tension at gate B12 rose. A few passengers started to take notice, their glances flicking toward Evelyn and the two officers. Most looked away, pretending to be busy with their phones or luggage. A child, holding his mother's hand, pointed at Evelyn and asked what was wrong with her. The mother quickly pulled the child away, offering no answer. Clarissa, standing a short distance away, crossed her arms, lips pressed together, barely containing a smile. The check-in agent stood frozen, eyes downcast, clearly wanting no part in the scene. Evelyn took a deep breath, still in control. She said that if there was no specific reason to detain her, she would like to proceed with boarding. Maddox scoffed, asking if she planned to teach the law to the police. Evelyn replied that she was merely asserting her rights as a citizen. Rourke repeated, "rights as a citizen," with a dry smirk, like he was savoring the irony. Something in Rourke's demeanor shifted. He was no longer just an officer following procedure. He was a man savoring the tiny power he held. He glanced at Maddox. No words needed. Both took a step forward, closing in on Evelyn, as if bracing for what came next. Evelyn stood her ground, gripping her bag tighter. Her eyes flicked to the handcuffs hanging from Rourke's belt. She had seen them in courtrooms before, presented as evidence in wrongful arrest cases. Now, they were right in front of her, closer than ever. In the corner of the room, a young man, Liam, a TikToker, was still filming. His hands were trembling now, but the camera remained focused on Evelyn. He didn't know who she was, but something in her eyes told him this shouldn't be happening. So he kept recording, even as his heart pounded with the sense that this video might change everything. At gate B12, the atmosphere felt compressed, heavy with curious stares and the tense silence of the crowd. Some people sneaked glances. Others pretended to be busy with their luggage or phones, but everyone could feel the tension spreading. In a quiet corner near the information pillar, Liam Tran, a Vietnamese-American man around 21 years old, sat leaning against the wall, his phone loosely in hand. He hadn't planned to become the center of any story, but what was unfolding before him made it impossible to look away. Liam wasn't the hero type you'd find in movies. He was just a rising TikToker, known for short travel clips, tech tips, and funny reaction videos meant to grab attention. Today's flight to Chicago was part of his plan to meet a group of content creators for a collaboration. He had planned to shoot a few lighthearted clips of the trip, throw in some upbeat music, and post them under a title like "A Travel Day with Liam." But something about what he saw in front of him made him change course. Not far away stood a black woman, well-dressed, standing tall in front of two security officers. She wasn't yelling, wasn't panicking. She held a calm so steady it seemed to defy the tension around her. Her eyes were sharp and alert, as if she was no stranger to moments like this. Liam immediately noticed the imbalance. On one side, her, composed and quietly confident. On the other, two officers, one younger, larger, with a commanding voice. The other older, more silent, but with a cold stare that brooked no defiance. Their words rang out clearly, each sentence etched into the air. "You're causing a disturbance. Your attitude is inappropriate. We have the right to inspect." Liam had seen countless similar videos online, captured incidents that went viral and sparked controversy. But this was the first time he saw it in real life. And for the first time, he realized he might be the only one recording the truth. Without overthinking it, Liam raised his phone to chest level and hit record. He didn't zoom in or get closer, just stayed at the right distance to capture the sound and image without drawing attention. His camera caught everything: the younger officer's frown, the older one's icy stare, and the subtle hand gesture from the woman in white behind them. Clarissa Whitmore, the one who had started it all. Most importantly, the camera caught the eyes of the black woman, who had not raised her voice once, but whose gaze was powerful enough to make anyone watching stop in their tracks. Liam didn't know who she was, but within the frame she stood as a point of calm between two opposing forces, the authority of the uniform and the prejudice in Clarissa's stare. In between, a storm was slowly forming, ready to sweep everything into its path. He hesitated for a moment. Posting this could mean trouble. His TikTok account, one he'd poured effort into, could get banned. He might be called as a witness, or worse, he could be threatened. But then he looked back at his screen, where the image of the woman still stood firm, unbent. If not him, who would capture the truth being twisted right in front of them? Liam opened the TikTok app and quickly edited the clip. He added a short but pointed caption: "What's happening at gate B12? Why are they stopping a black woman for standing in the right place?" The video was exactly 59 seconds long, short but heavy with meaning. He took a deep breath, then hit post. Within 3 minutes, the video had over 2,000 views. 10 minutes later, it shot up to 10,000. The first comments started pouring in, ranging from shock to outrage. "Is this real? Who is she? Can't believe this is still happening in 2025. Anyone at the airport? Can we confirm this?" Liam's phone buzzed non-stop, flooded with notifications. His follower count skyrocketed. Part of him felt a rush. His content had finally touched on something real. But deep down, another feeling crept in, a pressure he'd never felt before, a responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for. He watched the video again, this time not as a content creator, but as a witness. In that moment, he realized that sometimes hitting record isn't just about capturing an event. It's the beginning of something bigger, a journey that, though he didn't know it yet, would soon bring truth to light and force an entire system to reckon with itself. As if an invisible storm were gathering somewhere between the glass walls and the cold marble floor. Passengers walked by, dragging suitcases. Boarding announcements echoed overhead, but all of it seemed pushed aside, overtaken by a nameless pressure hanging in the air. Every gaze, whether intentional or accidental, was drawn to a single point: the black woman standing on the front line of confrontation, with two police officers in front of her, their voices growing sharper, though not yet shouting. Evelyn Monroe stood with her hand gently gripping her bag strap, her posture unwavering. She didn't yet know that this moment, these very minutes, would become the starting point of something far bigger. All she knew was that she couldn't and wouldn't back down. Officers Rourke and Maddox had closed in on her, their voices carrying the kind of authority they believed to be absolute. Rourke, his face unreadably calm, tried to manage the situation with clipped, cold questions. Maddox, by contrast, couldn't hide his impatience. He stood closer, his hand unconsciously resting on his belt, right near the glint of metal from his handcuffs reflecting the terminal lights. Maddox spoke first. His tone was harsh, as if he wanted to immediately crush any resistance. He said Evelyn was being uncooperative and that this was the real problem. He emphasized the word problem as if it were an undeniable accusation. But Evelyn didn't respond with anger or fear. She stood still, her gaze sharp but calm, as if she had encountered this kind of situation too many times before, not because she wanted to, but because life had made it a routine. She replied, slowly, clearly, every word deliberate. She had provided all the necessary documents, boarding pass, ID. She saw no reason to be questioned further as if she were a criminal. Her tone carried no defiance, but also no submission. It was a statement, a declaration that she had every right to be there, just like any other passenger. Maddox smirked, a half-smile full of disdain. He said the issue wasn't just about documents, it was her attitude. He accused her of obstructing their duties and disturbing other passengers. He stressed the word attitude as if it were the gravest crime she could commit. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned slightly, her gaze landing on a woman in white standing not far away. Clarissa Whitmore, arms folded, watching with smug satisfaction like she was enjoying a play she'd written. Evelyn asked calmly whether the woman over there had been the one who complained. Her question wasn't accusatory, but a request for clarity, an attempt to understand the source of all this. Rourke nodded briefly. Yes, they were acting on Clarissa's complaint. But when Evelyn followed up, asking if this entire questioning was based on glances and prejudice, no one answered. Her question hung in the air like a stone tossed into still water, creating ripples no one wanted to acknowledge. The crowd around them began to step back, forming an invisible circle. Some people pulled out their phones, though no one dared record yet. They just stood and watched, eyes shifting between Evelyn, the officers, and the tense space between them, where every word and glance was becoming a battleground of power and dignity. Some shook their heads, some whispered to each other, but no one intervened. Their silence, whether from fear or discomfort, only thickened the tension. Evelyn broke that silence. Her voice dropped slightly, as if addressing not only the officers but everyone around them. She said she knew how this would escalate. She had seen it too many times before, but she would not back down. She had the right to stand there, and she would not let anyone take that from her. Her words weren't a threat. They were a declaration, a defense of her right to exist in that space with dignity. Maddox took a half step forward, shoulders tensing as if his body moved before his mind caught up. Rourke glanced at him, a quick look, but one filled with meaning, urging him to stay calm. But Evelyn's eyes had already shifted everything. This wasn't the gaze of a passenger being questioned. It was the gaze of someone who knew this wasn't about boarding passes. This was a fight for dignity, for justice, for something far greater than this terminal. Maddox couldn't hold back. He hissed angrily, asking who she thought she was to talk back to the police. His question wasn't meant for an answer. It was meant to crush her spirit, to remind her she had no right to speak. But Evelyn didn't respond. She just looked at him, her eyes so piercing it rattled him. He felt something, a confidence he couldn't explain, like she carried a truth he'd never been allowed to see. Rourke, beside him, felt a chill run down his spine. His instincts told him they had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. He pressed his lips together, trying to remain composed. But Evelyn's eyes had made him hesitate, if only for a moment. At the end of the line, a young girl around 10 clung to her mother's hand, her wide eyes fixed on Evelyn. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but something in that woman's eyes made her go quiet. Her mother bent down, whispering to coax her away, but the girl resisted, afraid she might miss something important. Evelyn's eyes met hers amid the silent crowd. The child's clear, unprejudiced eyes were the only ones untouched by bias, filled only with fear and curiosity. And because of those eyes, Evelyn refused to look down. She turned back to Rourke and Maddox, voice steady enough to chill the air. She told them that if they were going to arrest her, they should go ahead, but they needed to remember people were watching. Her words weren't a challenge, they were a warning, a reminder that truth never stands alone. Maddox tightened his grip on his weapon belt, his eyes burning with fury. Rourke remained still, but his hand trembled slightly. And in a nearby corner, Liam, a young man with a phone in hand, kept filming. His camera didn't miss a moment. Not a word, not a glance, not a gesture. This time, the truth was being recorded. In the moment following Evelyn's firm declaration, time seemed to freeze at Gate B12. The sound of announcements, rolling suitcases, and murmurs all were muffled, like the world had paused to witness the inevitable. The silence didn't last long, but it was long enough to signal that an invisible line had been crossed, and instead of calming things down, that silence became the catalyst. Maddox broke it. Without warning, without a glance from Rourke to stop him, he stepped forward, yanked Evelyn's arm forcefully, and declared her under arrest for obstruction and disturbing public order. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the crowd, sharp and authoritarian. The words landed like a pre-written sentence. No debate, no proof needed. Evelyn didn't resist. She let him turn her, but her back remained straight, her head high, her steps steady despite the iron grip on her arm. When the cold handcuffs clicked shut around her wrist, the sound of metal clashing rang out, slicing through the airport's stifling air. The crowd stirred. Some leaned in, curious. Others raised their phones, but most stayed still, their eyes shifting between intrigue and fear. They wanted to record, but no one wanted to be first to hit record. Rourke stood a few steps away, his eyes dimming for a fleeting moment. It wasn't regret, just a rising sense that something was wrong. This woman wasn't just any random traveler. He could feel it, but it was too late. The decision had been made, and now both he and Maddox were caught in a tide they'd created. Far off, Clarissa Whitmore still stood with her arms folded, eyes gleaming with smug satisfaction. To her, everything had ended just as she wanted. The woman had been put in her place. Order, as she understood it, had been restored. Her smirk was the clearest proof of her self-satisfaction. But not everyone stayed silent. Liam, hands trembling, still filming, didn't stop. His camera captured it all. The glint of the cuffs, Evelyn's cold, steady eyes, and Clarissa's smug smile. 3 frames, 3 stories, 3 pieces of a truth no one could deny. Liam knew the video would change things and bring trouble, but he also knew some trouble is the price of doing what's right. He hit upload and the video began its journey, from one small phone to millions of eyes across the world. As Evelyn was led away, no one knew that those small actions, a written note, a video, a child's gaze, were already forming a story no one could erase. A story that, just hours later, would force an entire system to confront itself and bow to the power of truth. The air at Gate B12 felt compressed. In the brief moment after Evelyn's challenge, the entire space seemed to hold its breath. No one spoke, no one stepped forward. But it was precisely that silence that pushed everything further, as if the lack of intervention was a silent approval of what was about to unfold. And then Maddox was the first to act. No need for further orders, no warning glance from Rourke this time. Maddox moved in, quick and rough, grabbing Evelyn's arm. "You're under arrest for obstructing law enforcement and disturbing public order." His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for the crowd to hear. Some craned their necks, others raised their phones, but no one yet knew whether to film or to pretend not to see. Evelyn didn't resist. She simply turned in the direction she was being led. Back straight, eyes still forward. Her shoulders didn't slump, her steps didn't falter. Only her arm, pulled behind her, and the cold metallic snap of handcuffs echoed through the crowded airport terminal. Rourke stood nearby, silent. His eyes flickered for a moment, not with guilt, but with a sharp instinct. What had just been touched wasn't just another passenger. Something here was wrong, and this time, deeply wrong. Clarissa remained where she was, her satisfaction plain on her face. To her, it was over. Order had been restored. Everyone was back in their proper place, or at least removed from where they didn't belong. Liam, still in the corner, hands trembling, captured 3 shots in succession: the gleaming handcuffs, Evelyn's eyes staring directly into the lens, and Clarissa's tight-lipped smirk. 3 frames, 3 layers of power, 3 undeniable pieces of evidence. And at the end of the line, where few were paying attention, a 10-year-old girl was crying, not loudly, just silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Her mother leaned in, whispering something into her ear, but the girl didn't answer. She just kept her eyes on Evelyn's figure being led away, as if unwilling to let go of the image. "I want to go home," the girl said, her voice cracking. Her mother held her tightly, turning to leave. But as they passed the spot where Evelyn had just been dragged through, the woman paused. She said nothing. She only squeezed her daughter's hand tighter, as if offering a silent apology on behalf of an entire crowd that chose silence. Evelyn didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew who had witnessed, and she believed those eyes would not easily forget the image of a woman being arrested not for wrongdoing, but for daring to stand tall, unyielding, and with dignity. Elsewhere, a group of airport staff exchanged glances. One reached for his radio, then hesitated and let it go. Another shook her head slightly. No one spoke, no one acted. Because everyone knew intervening meant trouble, meant paperwork, statements, possibly even losing a job. Only Liam, the TikToker with shaking hands and a pounding heart, kept filming, even knowing the video could drag him into serious trouble. But deep down he knew, sometimes trouble is the price of protecting what's right. And at another security checkpoint, an older female officer, someone who had seen scenes like this too often, let out a long sigh. She jotted a short note into an internal logbook. Gate B12. Passenger arrest, no clear reason. Signs of abuse of power. Recommend reviewing surveillance footage. A small action. But it's exactly such small actions, logging, filming, and even the gaze of a child, that form the pieces of a story no one can deny. A story that just hours later would force the entire national security system to bow its head in apology. The interrogation room at the airport police station was cramped and cold, seemingly designed to make people feel subdued. A dull metal table stood in the center of the room, flanked by 2 creaky swivel chairs that groaned with every movement. The gray walls were mottled with peeling paint. In the corner of the ceiling, a surveillance camera blinked red, like a silent eye watching everything. This wasn't a place for dangerous criminals, but it wasn't a place for innocent people either. It was a gray zone, where the truth was often delayed, distorted, or sometimes forgotten. Evelyn Monroe sat in the chair, her hands still cuffed behind her back, red marks etched into her wrists where the metal had bitten down. The fluorescent light above shone directly down on her, catching strands of silver in her neatly tied hair. Those strands weren't signs of old age, but the scars of silent battles she had fought. Battles never featured on the front page of any newspaper. Calvin Rourke stood on the other side of the table, arms crossed, still visibly annoyed. To him, Evelyn was a problem to be dealt with swiftly, a woman who didn't know her place, too smart, too proud, and dangerous for daring to challenge his authority. She had turned the crowd at Gate B12 against him, made them look at him as if he were the one in the wrong, and that stung more than any protest could have. He spoke, voice dry, not bothering to meet her eyes. Name, age, address. Evelyn raised her head. Her gaze was calm but sharp. She answered, each word deliberate and clear, as if every syllable carried its own weight. Evelyn Monroe, 52 years old, Washington, D.C. Rourke typed quickly on the old keyboard, the computer screen flickering in the dim light. He continued, voice flat. "You patient?" At that moment, Evelyn looked him directly in the eyes. There was no smile, no trace of mockery, but her gaze was like a fine blade, not meant to wound, but to strip away all pretense. She spoke, voice low and clear. "I am Chief Judge Evelyn Monroe, United States Court of Appeals." The words weren't loud, not dramatic, but they dropped into the room like a block of ice, freezing the air. Time seemed to halt. The faint buzzing of the fluorescent light became the only sound, echoing through the oppressive silence. Rourke froze, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. He stared at the woman in front of him, then glanced at the screen, as if hoping to find some mistake that could negate what he had just heard. But there was no mistake. His face stiffened, his eyes wavering between disbelief and panic. In the corner, Troy Maddox, who had been leaning against the wall with a smug expression just moments before, nearly dropped the cup of water in his hand. His face turned pale, his chest rising and falling rapidly like the air was too thin. The name Evelyn Monroe wasn't unfamiliar. He'd heard it before, maybe in an article or a passing conversation, but he'd never imagined he'd hear it come from the very woman now handcuffed before him, the one he and Rourke had just treated like a disruptive nobody. A minute passed, then two. No one spoke. The room was thick with silence, as if the whole world was waiting for someone to explain something no one dared to say. Evelyn sat still, upright, her gaze unwavering. Despite the cuffs, despite being brought in like a suspect, she radiated an undeniable authority. Her eyes didn't accuse, her voice didn't rise, but both Rourke and Maddox could feel the weight of their mistake pressing down on them. In that moment, the small room seemed to shrink, and the two officers, who thought they were in control, realized they had just crossed a dangerous line. They hadn't just detained a passenger, they had detained a figure of justice, someone whose identity and reputation carried enough weight to shake the system itself. Evelyn said nothing more. She didn't need to. The truth had now spoken for itself, and in that silence it echoed louder than any accusation could. Inside the cramped interrogation room at the airport police station, Evelyn Monroe sat upright in a cold metal chair. The fluorescent light above illuminated the sharp lines of her face, but it couldn't touch the calm in her eyes. Outside that room, no one holding her knew that an invisible, unstoppable storm had already begun. It didn't start with an official statement or a sensational headline, but with something small, familiar, and unexpectedly powerful. A video not even 60 seconds long. Not far from there, Liam, a 19-year-old with his phone practically glued to his hand, had posted the video to TikTok at 5:32 p.m. He hadn't thought much when he hit post. For him, it was just a moment of injustice, instinctively recorded, but in just 3 hours, the video had far exceeded anything Liam imagined, racking up over 2.1 million views. Thousands of shares, comments, and reactions poured in like an unstoppable flood. The video opened with the sharp snap of handcuffs, a dry click that jolted the senses. The camera panned slowly over Evelyn's upright figure, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes looking straight ahead, unwavering. In the background, Maddox's voice rang out clearly. "You're being arrested for causing a disturbance." But immediately after, like an invisible backlash, voices from the crowd broke in, echoing through the frame. "What disturbance? She was just standing there," a middle-aged man said angrily. "What did she do wrong?" a woman added, her voice trembling, barely holding back emotion. Within seconds, viewers around the world understood this wasn't a routine arrest. It was a naked injustice, undeniable and indefensible. On TikTok, hashtags began appearing like sparks in a dry forest. B12 incident. Black woman arrested. Who is she? But before 00 can wipe us away, life just began. Within 6 hours, Liam's video was no longer a single clip. It became the center of a wave. Stitched videos, duets, breakdowns, and reactions from every direction. A young lawyer in Chicago sat before her camera, voice firm as she dissected every legal angle of the case. A social justice activist in Atlanta shared her own story, connecting the incident to her lived experiences. Even a fashion influencer in Los Angeles, known mostly for styling videos, paused to speak about the outrage she felt watching the clip. "This isn't just about one woman," she said, eyes brimming with tears. "This is about all of us." The question, "Who is she?" began to appear in thousands of comments, a relentless refrain. In New York, inside a newsroom meeting at a major media outlet, a political editor named Sarah stopped typing. On her screen played the now viral video, and something in the woman's posture made her pause. "Wheat?" she murmured, a faint sense of recognition flickering. "Inte name. It's familiar." She opened the internal database, typing quickly. Less than 3 minutes later, the result appeared. Clear, unmistakable. Evelyn Monroe, Judge, U.S. Court of Appeals. Sarah nearly lost her breath. She turned to a colleague, voice urgent. "This isn't just anyone. That's Judge Monroe." 30 minutes later, the newsroom's first online headline went live. Shocking reveal: woman arrested at airport, identified as federal judge. From there, the dominoes fell. CNN rolled a breaking news banner. MSNBC launched an emergency panel discussion. Fox News, BBC, Al Jazeera, every network jumped in, each with its own angle, its own headline, its own question. But at the core, they all asked the same thing. What happened at Gate B12? Back at the airport police station, the air shifted, though Evelyn remained seated, calm and resolute. A duty officer named Jason felt his phone buzz non-stop in his pocket. He pulled it out, and his face went pale as the interrogation room, his own location, appeared on screen. Liam's video, now shared tens of thousands of times, was spreading across the globe. A colleague ran up and whispered urgently, "Do you know who that is? That's Judge Monroe. The whole system's going into shock." Not far away, in an airport security meeting room, Airport Police Chief Richard Holt was reviewing operations when his assistant pulled him aside. Pale-faced, the assistant handed over a phone. On screen was the first news article confirming Evelyn's identity. Holt didn't even have time to gather himself. His phone lit up with calls. The first was from the chief of airport security, voice tense. "What's going on, Richard? She's a federal judge." The second came from the Department of Justice, short, cold. "Book case file, now." And the third, most unexpected, was from the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Court of Appeals. Holt felt his throat tighten. He realized this wasn't just an internal matter anymore. This was a storm, and he was standing right in the eye of it. But this wave wasn't just about a single video. It was a reckoning, a collective awakening. In a small house in Ohio, a mother watched the news with her 10-year-old daughter, the same girl who had witnessed the incident at Gate B12. When Evelyn's image appeared, the girl squeezed her mother's hand. She said nothing, but her eyes lit up with a spark of hope. In a Seattle coffee shop, a group of college students stopped talking, eyes locked on their phones as B12 incident trended across Twitter. In a law office in Atlanta, a seasoned attorney shook his head and muttered to himself, "Here we go again. But this time, they won't be able to bury it." Liam's video, just a moment in time, had ignited a larger conversation. It didn't just expose the injustice at Gate B12, it forced society to confront the questions it had long avoided. Why was someone like Evelyn Monroe, with her name, her dignity, her power, treated like a criminal? Why did the system allow it to happen? And more importantly, what happens next? Inside the interrogation room, Evelyn didn't know that the world outside was shifting because of her. She didn't hear the notifications. She didn't see the headlines. She didn't read the hashtags spreading across social media. But she felt something, a silent momentum, as if the air itself pulsed with the force of truth. She sat there, gaze unwavering, as if ready for whatever came next. The storm had begun. A woman was handcuffed, the name dismissed, and a system now forced to face itself. From TikTok to newsrooms, from the airport to the courts, Evelyn Monroe's story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever seen injustice, ever brushed past pain, and ever asked, "Will justice finally be done this time?" Less than an hour after Evelyn Monroe's identity was confirmed, the internal communication systems of the airport and federal agencies roared to life with unprecedented intensity. Emergency lines lit up, encrypted calls rang nonstop, and urgent messages were dispatched from the airport's Security Coordination Center all the way to Washington, D.C. A request to extract all surveillance data from Gate B-12 was issued almost immediately, accompanied by a top-secret directive. No footage was to be deleted or altered under any circumstances. At 9:04 p.m., a black, unmarked SUV came to a sudden stop at the airport's back gate, an area typically reserved for senior staff or emergency protocols. 3 people stepped out. 2 U.S. Marshals with a rigid bearing and eyes that missed nothing, and a woman in a light gray suit wearing a discreet badge that read Deputy Federal Legal Advisor. They didn't pass through the main terminal or pause for security. They headed straight for the Internal Investigations Unit, where the air was already stretched thin with tension. Airport Police Chief Richard Hensley was urgently summoned. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he entered the office, his face nearly unraveling. The first thing he saw was Evelyn Monroe, now uncuffed, sitting upright at a cold stainless steel table. Her hands rested gently on the surface, eyes sharp but composed, like she wasn't someone who had just been detained, but rather someone presiding over a hearing. 2 on-duty officers stood against the wall, pale-faced, their eyes darting nervously, unable to meet hers. Evelyn didn't wait for Hensley to speak. She stood up, and her voice rang out, not loud, but with the weight of an unchallengeable command. "I request the immediate sealing of all video footage from Gate B-12. This includes all security cameras, body cams worn by involved personnel, and internal audio recordings." Each word was forged like steel, clear, sharp, and leaving no room for ambiguity. The woman in the gray suit, the deputy legal advisor, gave a small nod, formally validating Evelyn's request. One of the U.S. Marshals immediately pulled out a satellite phone and issued the command directly to the airport's data center. The room grew heavier as everyone inside realized this had escalated beyond the bounds of a routine arrest. Evelyn continued, her voice maintaining strict composure. "Additionally, I request the administrative detainment of the 2 officers who arrested me, Calvin Rourke and Troy Maddox. They are not to leave the premises. The investigation will commence tonight." Her words carried no personal emotion, yet they froze both Hensley and the 2 duty officers in place. The chief opened his mouth, perhaps to explain or plead, but the cold stare of the marshal standing nearby shut him down. People who hold real power don't need to raise their voice to be heard. Immediately, technical staff were dispatched. They rushed in with urgency, carrying equipment to back up hard drives, extract memory cards, and seal off all related devices. Gate B-12 was designated with the red priority code, the highest level in the airport's internal emergency protocol system. "Gate B-12 is temporarily closed until further notice." Passengers were rerouted, staff were ordered to clear out, and the once buzzy concourse went silent, its noise replaced only by the hurried footsteps of security personnel. At 9:37 p.m., Officer Maddox was asked to surrender all personal equipment. He slowly removed his radio, access card, and finally his badge, his hands trembling as he placed it in the duty sergeant's hand. His once confident demeanor from Gate B-12 had completely vanished. A few feet away, Rourke stood in silence. He said nothing. He just looked at Evelyn, as if searching for a way out, a justification, but deep down he knew the door had shut the moment he gave the order to handcuff her. Evelyn showed no sign of triumph, no smirk, no glint of satisfaction. She simply nodded to the marshal beside her and said, voice low but firm, "Inform the Chief of Staff. I'll be submitting a full written account of the incident tonight." Her words weren't just an update. They were a clear assertion that she was in control, not as a victim, but as someone upholding the scales of justice. No one in the room dared speak, but in the eyes of everyone present, from the police chief to the uniformed officers, one undeniable truth had taken hold. Everything had changed. The truth could no longer be hidden or distorted, and the one leading this reckoning wasn't a man in uniform. It was the woman they had once put in handcuffs, a woman whose name and reputation now had the weight to make an entire system answer to her. 10:15 p.m., second floor of the airport's administrative wing. The conference room, usually reserved for flight scheduling or lost luggage discussions, had now become the center of a federal-level legal and public relations crisis. Fluorescent lights cast a cold glow over the dark wooden table where senior representatives sat with tense expressions. The Deputy Federal Legal Counsel, the Internal Affairs Representative for the airport, the Regional Commander of the U.S. Marshals, and heads of airport security. The atmosphere was so heavy that even the ticking of the wall clock sounded amplified. At the head of the table sat Evelyn Monroe, upright, no longer in handcuffs, still wearing the same dark suit she had worn when arrested just hours before. In her hand was a handwritten report, hastily composed in less than 10 minutes, but each line cut as sharply as the judgments she once delivered at the Federal Court of Appeals. She didn't look around the room with the gaze of a victim. Instead, her eyes carried the resolve of someone who had witnessed justice twisted too many times to remain silent. She began, her voice low and clear, without hesitation. "I will recount the entire incident, every step, every action, every word that led to my being handcuffed in an airport, as a lawful citizen, a business-class passenger, and a federal official without any legal basis." And then she told her story. From Clarissa Whitmore's first contemptuous look, the mocking gesture laced with bias, to her words seemingly taken straight from a manual of discrimination. She recounted how Troy Maddox used the phrase "suspicious attitude" as a stand-in for evidence, and how Calvin Rourke, through complicit silence, allowed everything to escalate. She didn't leave out the crowd's silence, passengers, airport staff, and even those in power who chose not to intervene. No one in the room dared interrupt her. No eyes turned away. Evelyn's words were not emotionally charged accusations, but their precision and clarity weighed heavily on everyone present. She wasn't just telling her story. She was exposing a system that had allowed such events to occur far too many times. When she finished, the room fell into silence. Only the hurried scratching of the Deputy Legal Counsel's pen could be heard. Then she looked up, eyes sharp, and gave a small nod. "We'll request the identification of all personnel involved. Video from Gate B12 has been fully retrieved. There is now evidence from both airport surveillance and independent social media sources." Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze unchanged. She knew that this time, social media wasn't on the sidelines. Liam Tran's 59-second video had spread at lightning speed, carrying with it a truth that no system could distort. That truth now had sound, images, and millions of people ready to share it. Meanwhile, a U.S. Marshal agent leaned in to whisper something to the airport security chief, his voice low but urgent. "We've identified the woman who filed the complaint. Name, Clarissa Whitmore. Boarded at 6:04 p.m. Destination, Boston." The security chief nodded and responded quickly. "Forward to Boston Airport Security. Request hold for questioning as a key witness." His words were brief, but they marked the beginning of a chain of actions that could no longer be stopped. The energy in the room shifted from shock to action. Agencies began assigning tasks with urgent coordination. Technical staff were instructed to re-examine all camera data, including footage that might have been overlooked. The Internal Affairs representative pledged an independent investigation into the conduct of Rourke and Maddox, while the U.S. Marshals committed to protecting all witnesses involved. Everyone in the room understood this was no longer just an internal airport issue. It had become a federal matter, with consequences far beyond what anyone had imagined. And at the center of it all was Evelyn Monroe, the woman once dragged away like a public nuisance, now the focal point of a multi-agency investigation. She asked for no pity, no vengeance. She only asked for the truth. And that truth was being restored, minute by minute, right here in this room. Outside, rain began to fall, heavy drops hitting the concrete of the runway. In the digital world, the hashtag Evelyn Monroe surged to the #1 trending topic nationwide, with millions of shares and comments. A storm of public outcry was coming, strong and unstoppable. But this time, Evelyn wasn't the one standing in the rain. She was the one holding the umbrella, leading the truth into the light. And everyone who had once thought she would stay silent, from Clarissa Whitmore to Rourke and Maddox, was now about to face questions they could no longer avoid. 7:00 a.m. the next morning. On the large screen in the living room of a 6th-floor apartment in a residential area in southern Montgomery, the morning news played, the anchor's voice steady and clear. In this, the video currently shocking the nation, a black woman handcuffed by police in the middle of an airport, later confirmed to be Chief Judge Evelyn Monroe of the United States Court of Appeals. The screen replayed Liam's video, now with a bold caption added, source, TikTok/@LiamTrantek. In a small corner of the frame, Clarissa Whitmore's face was identified using image recognition software. A subtitle scrolled across the bottom. Woman suspected of inciting the incident, currently under investigation. On the sofa, a 10-year-old girl sat silently, hugging her knees. Her eyes didn't leave the screen. She was the same child who had witnessed Evelyn being handcuffed just a few meters away. All through the night, she had said little, only whispered one question to her mother before falling asleep. Mom, did she cry? Now, seeing Evelyn on television, not being led away but revealed as the head of a federal court, the girl remained quiet for a long time. Then she slowly turned to her mother. She's really strong, isn't she, Mom? The mother gently stroked her daughter's hair. Her voice was soft but tinged with emotion. Yes, stronger than they ever imagined. The news segment continued, now shifting to analysis. A constitutional law expert joined via Zoom, stating clearly, this wasn't just a mistaken arrest. It's a test of the entire system. It raises the question, if this can happen to someone like Evelyn Monroe, what happens to those without a name or title? The little girl didn't fully understand those words, but she remembered the way Evelyn had looked at her, not like a child, but like someone worth listening to. Across the country, in a luxury hotel in Boston, Clarissa Whitmore sat in her room, holding a cup of cold tea. The same broadcast was playing on her television. Clarissa no longer wore the smirk she had the day before. She sat motionless. Her eyes no longer held confidence. They wavered. Her name was now being linked to the phrase, inciting division and manipulating law enforcement. 20 poor reporters, 2 viewers. One began to understand the power of courage. The other began to feel the weight of truth. That morning, at 8:47 a.m., just as the first sunlight filtered through the large windows of the nation's newsrooms, an article appeared on the homepage of the Sentinel, the country's most renowned investigative newspaper. The headline was short but chilling. Officer who arrested Judge Evelyn Monroe, previously accused of racial profiling 3 times. Within minutes, the article spread like wildfire, igniting social media. Shares, comments, and reactions surged in, turning the name Rourke, a previously unknown airport security officer, into the eye of a public storm. This wasn't a piece based on vague recollections. It was grounded in hard evidence, leaked internal reports from the Department of Aviation Security, excerpts from citizen complaints filed with the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, and painstakingly verified details by investigative journalists. Every line in the article cut through the facade, Rourke and the system had built over the years. In 2012, a 33-year-old black man, en route to his sister's wedding, was stopped by Rourke at a security checkpoint. With no clear cause, he was subjected to a full-body search, his luggage rifled through, while enduring the suspicious stares of nearby passengers. He was later released without apology, having committed no offense. He filed a complaint, describing the humiliation and injustice he felt, but the file was quickly shelved with a cold note: insufficient evidence. That man, now a father of two, still remembers the feeling of being treated like a criminal for nothing but the color of his skin. In 2016, an African-American woman, a CEO of a startup, was shouted at by Rourke at the check-in counter. He accused her of posing as a priority passenger and demanded she surrender her ticket, even after she had shown proper documents. According to her complaint, his voice felt less like a reprimand and more like a threat, leaving her not just insulted but fearful for her safety. The matter was quietly resolved in a closed-door meeting on the condition she withdraw her complaint. She agreed, not out of peace, but fear of prolonged fallout. That record, too, vanished into the system's shadows. In 2019, a 20-year-old Middle Eastern student was pulled into a private room by Rourke for having a suspicious look. He was interrogated for nearly an hour, despite no evidence of wrongdoing. In his internal report, Rourke claimed the student exhibited uncooperative behavior, a vague phrase, yet sufficient to justify his actions. The student, now working for an NGO, still feels anxiety every time he walks through airport security. Like the others, his complaint was marked "no further action" and quietly buried. 3 incidents, 3 individuals, 3 complaints, and 3 times the system chose concealment over accountability. These stories, once blurred beneath red stamps and the words "no further action," were now dragged into the light, spreading like oil across water that once seemed calm. Only when a woman, whose title far exceeded anything Rourke could have imagined, was handcuffed in a public terminal, was his past finally forced open. On Twitter, outrage exploded. An anonymous account claiming to be a former airport staffer posted a sharp message. Everyone knew Rourke had issues, but he was trusted by the brass. Staying silent was the only way to keep your job. The tweet was shared thousands of times, accompanied by more personal accounts from others who had either witnessed or endured Rourke's conduct. Each story was a piece of a larger puzzle, revealing a man who had abused his authority under the cover of silence, protected by peers and superiors alike. The public's fury wasn't solely about Rourke's actions. It stemmed from a deeper truth. Too many people had known, had seen the signs, and said nothing. The system, layered in complex procedures and closed-door decisions, had become a haven for misconduct like his. Every buried complaint was more than a failure of justice. It was a wound left on those who once believed in fairness. In a federal office in Washington, D.C., Evelyn Monroe sat at her desk, sunlight framing her composed face. Before her lay printed copies of the 3 old case files, documents the Sentinel had published but now delivered to her via official channels. She flipped through each page, reading the blurred lines and red stamps marked "no further action." Her hands did not tremble, but her eyes grew heavy, as if seeing not only Rourke's past, but the system's long complicity. She turned to her assistant standing nearby, her voice calm but resolute, weighted with a promise. "This time," she said, "the file won't be shelved again." It wasn't just a vow. It was a declaration of war, not only against Rourke, but against a system that had grown too comfortable shirking responsibility. Evelyn knew that the Gate B-12 incident wasn't just her story. It was the story of the man from 2012, the woman from 2016, the student from 2019, and of thousands of others whose voices had been silenced. Meanwhile, at the airport, Rourke felt the shift in the air. Colleagues who once patted his back now avoided his gaze. Superiors who once shielded him now kept their distance. His phone buzzed non-stop, messages from friends and family, but he didn't dare open them. He knew his past, once thought buried, was now exposed for the world to see, And this time, no red stamp or private meeting could save him. The Sentinel's article wasn't just an indictment of Rourke. It was a reminder: justice, though delayed, always finds a way back. From Twitter threads to newsroom editorials, from Evelyn's desk to conversations on street corners, the story of Rourke and his victims had unleashed a truth that could no longer be ignored. Silence is not an answer, and once the truth is out, it refuses to be buried again. 1026 AYM. Inside a small makeshift office tucked within the airport's internal area, Troy Maddox sat with his head bowed, both hands clenched tightly between his knees. The aggression was gone. The confidence in his eyes had vanished. All that remained was a sheen of sweat collecting at the nape of his neck and red-rimmed eyes that looked like they had just weathered a long, bitter storm. Maddox had never imagined things would go this far. To him, Evelyn Monroe was, at first, just a woman standing where she didn't belong. But now, everything had changed, massively. The press was mentioning her name like it belonged to a symbol. Rourke's past was being dug up, and now Maddox knew one thing for certain: he had been a pawn, and if he didn't act soon, he'd become the sacrifice. The door swung open. Rourke entered without knocking, without asking. He threw a stack of papers onto the desk, printouts of social media headlines. Maddox's face drained of color as he recognized his own image beside Evelyn. A still from the video that had now spread across every platform. "Keep your mouth shut, completely. Got it?" Rourke said, his voice low but sharp-edged. Maddox swallowed hard. "I know who she is now, Cal. This isn't just an internal issue anymore." "You think I don't know that? But if you talk, you'll be the first one they throw under the bus. And you're the one who cuffed her, not me." That truth hit like a slap. Maddox looked up, and in Rourke's eyes he no longer saw a colleague. What he saw was someone ready to cut him loose, to save himself. That afternoon, Maddox requested to speak with a private attorney. By 2:12 p.m., in a closed-door session with a federal legal representative, he began to give his statement. Not complete, but enough to spark a deeper investigation. "I didn't know she was a judge, but I knew what we did that day was wrong. Rourke told me not to ask questions, just follow orders. I got used to doing things that way, but this time I couldn't stomach it." The statement was filed under the tag "Initial Cooperation, Witness Protection Requested." No one inside the system expected Maddox, the impulsive, hot-tempered one, to be the first to fold. But sometimes, the ones who break first don't do so out of weakness. They do it because they're the only ones left with a sense of guilt. And that testimony, small as it was, became a key piece, one that began to shake the system from within. In the Federal Investigation Office in Boston, Clarissa Whitmore sat in a leather chair, her hands clasped tightly as if to hide the trembling. The soft ceiling light shone down, but it couldn't ease the deep tension carved into her face. Her Chanel coat, once a symbol of confidence and authority, now felt like a flimsy shell, no defense against the storm coming for her. Clarissa tried to maintain her familiar posture, head held high, presence poised. She sat straight, eyes still laced with a hint of arrogance, but something had changed. Gone was the sharp, defiant look she wore at Gate B12. Now her gaze flickered, as if searching for an exit she already knew didn't exist. The investigator, a middle-aged man with a calm but piercing voice, looked her straight in the eyes. "You know why you're here today, don't you?" he asked, placing a folder on the table. His tone was emotionless, but it made the air in the room feel heavy. Clarissa pressed her lips together and forced a smile. "I was simply expressing a concern," she said, voice soft but calculated. "I didn't intend for anything serious to happen. Just a little misunderstanding at the airport, you know." She shrugged, as if describing something trivial and forgettable. The investigator didn't respond. Instead, he tapped a screen on the desk. A now familiar video began to play, the one filmed by Liam, the young TikToker at the airport. The footage was clear: Clarissa's mocking tongue gesture, her sharp glare at Evelyn Monroe, and finally the arrogant wave that summoned security. In the background, voices from the crowd rang out, "What did she even do? Where's the disturbance?" Each line cut through Clarissa's confidence like a blade. She shifted her eyes, trying to remain composed. "I don't remember doing that," she said, her voice slightly higher than before. "Maybe I was just acting under stress. Airports are always chaotic." She shrugged again, but the gesture looked forced now, like an actor forgetting her lines. The investigator said nothing. He switched to an audio clip. The voice of Maddox, the officer who stood with Rourke that day, filled the quiet room. His voice was low, shaky, like someone battling himself. "She pointed at that woman and told us to handle it," Maddox said. "Rourke told me not to ask questions. I just followed orders. But I—" He paused. His voice softened. "I knew it wasn't right." Silent. Clarissa didn't move. In that moment, she seemed frozen, her eyes locked on the table, where the speaker continued to echo Maddox's words. Every excuse she'd prepared, every story crafted to protect her image, evaporated. What she once thought was a petty show of power, a fleeting moment at the airport, was now being examined under the scrutiny of a federal investigation. Every glance, every gesture, every word she uttered now carried legal weight, and no Chanel coat or polished voice could undo that. The investigator leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Would you like to add anything?" he asked, still calm but with a pressure that filled the space. Clarissa took a deep breath. For the first time her voice trembled, lacking its usual confidence. I'm sorry," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "If my actions caused things to go this far, I deeply regret it." The apology hung in the cold air. It carried no weight, no sincerity, and certainly no power to heal the damage she had caused. It was the apology of someone cornered, a last-ditch attempt to salvage image when all escape routes were blocked. But in this room, in front of those searching for the truth, it echoed hollow. Hundreds of miles away, in her Washington office, Evelyn Monroe received a copy of the recorded statement. She opened it, watched for a few seconds, then shut it. She shook her head, her expression unchanged. Not out of anger, not out of surprise. She'd seen too many apologies like this, spoken not out of remorse, but fear of consequences. She turned back to her work. Evelyn knew justice wasn't built on late apologies. Justice rested on action, accountability, and those willing to stand up against injustice. Meanwhile, in Boston, Clarissa Whitmore could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her shoulders. She had once believed that power, be it money, status, or confidence, could bend everything to her will. She once believed that a moment at an airport, a gesture, a glance, would leave no mark. But now she faced a different reality. The system she once saw as hers to command was now staring straight back at her. And this time, the truth, backed by a video, a testimony, and a wave of public reckoning, could not be twisted. As she left the investigation office, stepping onto the streets of Boston, the sky was fading into dusk. But that dimming light brought no relief. She knew this story wasn't over. Liam's video, Maddox's confession, and Evelyn Monroe's identity had changed everything. Prejudice, the thing she once believed harmless, was now laid bare before the world. And no matter how expensive the suit or how elegant the words, the truth stood firm. In justice, prejudice has no place. The storm she accidentally sparked at Gate B12 had spun far beyond her control. And as she walked away, her heels echoing on the pavement, Clarissa Whitmore, for the first time, felt the loneliness of someone who had just lost the power they once thought was untouchable. 1 week after the airport incident, a light rain was falling in Washington. The drops were thin and cold, misting over the stone pavement in front of the Federal Court of Appeals. Evelyn Monroe stepped out through the main doors. No security detail, no reporters, just a black umbrella and a folder in her hand. This afternoon she had a special meeting. It wasn't on her official calendar, but it mattered more than any court session. The apartment was in a quiet complex in the southeastern part of the city. The woman who opened the door was the mother of the 10-year-old girl, the same mother who had held her daughter close while walking away from the airport as Evelyn was being handcuffed. She invited Evelyn in with a hesitant look, as if still trying to reconcile the woman dragged off that day with someone powerful enough to make an entire system bow its head. The little girl was sitting on the couch, legs pulled up over the edge, hugging a small notebook. When she saw Evelyn, she didn't run over. She didn't look away either. She simply watched, just like she had that day, silently, without judgment, but full of thought. Evelyn sat down next to her, leaving just enough space between them. After a moment, she spoke gently. "I'm sorry you had to see something a child shouldn't have to see." The girl didn't respond, but her eyes softened. Evelyn continued. "I didn't protect you that day," she said, "but I promise I won't let you grow up with that fear. I promise." This time, the girl turned her head. "Were you scared when they handcuffed you?" she asked. Evelyn nodded slightly. "Yes, but I'm used to fear. What matters is not letting it decide who you are." The girl looked down at her notebook and opened a page. On it was a rough drawing of the airport scene. A woman standing between two police officers, a crowd in the distance, but the woman in the drawing had a halo over her head, as if, in the eyes of the child, Evelyn hadn't been humiliated, she had been tested. Evelyn stared at the drawing for a long time. She didn't say anything, just smiled, then pulled a small envelope from her bag. "I brought you some books. If one day you want to understand why people have to fight, read those pages. And if you ever want to do something about it, you can start by writing your own story." The girl accepted the envelope, but didn't open it. She only nodded, and that's when Evelyn knew. Not every child needs a lecture. Some young souls just need to be seen, to be trusted, and to be handed something worth holding on to. On the ride home, it was still raining, but the streetlights reflected off the car window, lighting Evelyn's face. Not the face of a victor, but of someone who had planted the seeds of belief. As justice isn't always a verdict. Sometimes it's a promise between a woman once in handcuffs and a child who once felt fear. And from that moment, both of them knew. We are silent no more. On Monday morning at 8:00 a.m., the atmosphere outside the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia was as tense as a drawn wire. The white stone steps leading up to the courthouse had become the focal point for dozens of journalists, many of whom had arrived before dawn. Cameras were lined up, lenses aimed directly at the entrance, ready to capture every footstep, every glance that might become a headline. Today marked the opening of the federal trial of Calvin Rourke and Troy Maddox, the two officers charged with serious offenses, abuse of power, unlawful arrest, and violation of civil rights in the case involving Judge Evelyn Monroe. The court entrance was under unprecedented lockdown. 3 layers of security had been established, with staff checking every ID badge and inspecting every bag. No recording devices were permitted unless accompanied by a special court-issued credential. But even with all these measures in place, information still found ways to leak, like water through cracks. 5 news feeds immediately zeroed in on the moment Rourke and Maddox stepped out of the transport vehicle. Rourke tried to maintain a composed expression, but the tight line of his lips and his avoidance of the cameras told a different story. Maddox, on the other hand, couldn't hide his panic. His hands shook as he signed intake documents, his eyes darting anxiously, searching for something, anything, solid to hold on to. And the pressure wasn't just crushing the 2 defendants. It extended throughout the system, from federal prosecutors carefully weighing every word of the indictment to the judicial communications team scripting every statement to avoid further controversy. Yet, no matter how tightly things were controlled, one image could not be erased from the public consciousness. Evelyn Monroe, handcuffed at gate B12, her voice steady and sharp as she declared, "I am Judge Evelyn Monroe, U.S. Court of Appeals." That sentence, captured in Liam Tran's viral video, had become a symbol, a stark reminder of injustice and the enduring power of truth. International human rights organizations spoke out swiftly. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch issued statements calling for a full investigation into abuse of power within the airport security system. The American Bar Association sent an official letter to the Department of Justice, urging a broader probe into the pattern of internal complaint suppression. Voices that had long remained silent now rose in unison, from grassroots activists to veteran attorneys, all echoing the same point. This trial was not just about two men. It was a moment for an entire system to face itself. As expected, the media attempted to maintain neutrality. Some conservative outlets published opinion pieces arguing that public reaction was overblown and that the case represented an isolated error in judgment. But most public commentary, whether from columnists or social media users, agreed that this was a turning point. This wasn't just the trial of Rourke and Maddox. It was an interrogation of how power is wielded and how deeply prejudice can shape everyday decisions. Evelyn Monroe, the woman at the center of the storm, chose not to attend the first morning of the trial. Her decision wasn't to avoid attention. It was rooted in principle. She believed that true justice doesn't require her presence to shine. She wanted to leave space for the legal system, the very institution she had spent her life defending, to prove that it could right itself if it had the courage to face its own failures. Her absence, in some ways, was more powerful than if she had walked through the courthouse doors. It forced everyone to focus on the truth, not the individual. When the courtroom doors opened, the air inside grew heavy. Those present, from attorneys and prosecutors to permitted witnesses and journalists, could feel the weight of the moment. All eyes turned toward the witness stand, still empty. But in the minds of those following the trial, whether inside the courtroom or watching by the millions through screens, that chair was already occupied. It belonged to Evelyn Monroe, called the woman who was arrested for simply standing in the right place and whose unwavering presence had forced an entire system to stop and see itself in the mirror of its own mistakes. Monday morning, 8:58 a.m., the second day of hearings inside Courtroom 3 of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and in that instant, every eye in the room, jurors, attorneys, reporters, witnesses, turned toward the sound. The space, already tense under the weight of the case, seemed to pause. Evelyn Monroe entered. There was no formal announcement, no introduction from the court clerk, but her presence pulled the room into stillness, as if the air had been compressed by an unseen force. The sound of her heels tapped softly on the marble floor, steady, unhurried, but each step carried an unshakable resolve. No one whispered, no one shifted, even the clack of keyboards from the press corner fell silent, as if everyone instinctively knew this moment needed no interruption. Evelyn wore a dark suit, simple but sharp, not a detail out of place. Her face was calm, like the surface of an autumn lake, not from detachment, but from the deep composure of someone long accustomed to facing storms far greater than this courtroom. And it was precisely that calmness, combined with her piercing but unangry gaze, that made her impossible to look away from. She approached the witness stand. The court clerk, voice soft but solemn, invited her to take the oath. Evelyn raised her right hand, her eyes meeting the presiding judge's, a former colleague, someone who had once sat with her in private meetings to discuss judicial reform. No words were exchanged between them, but in that brief look there was quiet solidarity and an unspoken promise. Today, justice would not be evaded. As Evelyn began to speak, the room seemed to hold its breath. She recounted what happened at Gate B12, from Clarissa Whitmore's contemptuous stare to the prejudiced questions from Rourke and Maddox, and finally to the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. Her voice never rose, never dipped into personal emotion, but every sentence carried an undeniable weight. She didn't speak as a victim pleading for sympathy. She spoke as someone who had lived inside the justice system and had at one point been failed by it. She recounted each detail with the precision of a judge, but also with the sincerity of a human being. She didn't exaggerate or embellish, but the way she spoke made listeners feel the gravity of what had happened, not just to her, but to anyone who had ever been treated unjustly for how they looked or where they came from. Her words were like stones, placed one by one, building a wall of truth that could not be. At the defense table, Calvin Rourke sat with his head bowed, eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look Evelyn in the eye. Perhaps he was coming to terms with the fact that what he did was not a momentary lapse, but a stain he'd carry for life. Next to him, Troy Maddox bit his lip, eyes brimming with tears. His shoulders trembled slightly, as if the weight of what was unfolding had finally crushed the last of his bravado. At the back of the courtroom, a young journalist, who had followed the case from the beginning, gently placed her hand on the table and removed her headphones. She no longer wanted to hear through a device. She wanted to hear Evelyn's voice, unfiltered, direct, human. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just documenting a case. She was witnessing history. Evelyn ended her testimony with a simple sentence, but it rang through the courtroom like a declaration. As he says up at Chatham, "I do not seek punishment, I seek awakening. And if today the truth can be heard in full, then I believe we still have hope." For several seconds, no sound followed. No one said a word. The courtroom, with its powerful attorneys, seasoned reporters, and high-ranking legal officials, suddenly felt small compared to the presence of a woman once handcuffed, now standing tall in the heart of justice. Not to demand revenge, but to demand change. No one applauded. No one needed to. The silence in the room, in that moment, was the deepest form of acknowledgement. It was proof that what Evelyn Monroe had done, not only at Gate B12, but here, in this very courtroom, would not only be remembered in transcripts, but recorded in the future chapters of legal history. The final week of the trial in Courtroom 3 of the U.S. District Court in the District of Columbia unfolded in a tense but quiet atmosphere. The room was packed, yet Free Press had no access. Only one official judicial camera was allowed to record for archival purposes. Outside, the entire nation waited, watching from living room TVs to scrolling social media feeds. The presiding judge, a man who had once sat alongside Evelyn Monroe at judicial reform conferences, entered the courtroom. His face was solemn, his gaze unwavering, carrying the weight of someone who understood the gravity of the moment. He scanned the room, jury, attorneys, defendants, and the many eyes fixed on him, before opening the verdict file. His voice rang out, steady and emotionless. Defendant Calvin Rourke, sentenced to 6 years in prison, with no parole eligibility for the first 3. He paused briefly, then continued. Defendant Troy Maddox, sentenced to 3 years, with the final year suspended due to full cooperation and admission of wrongdoing. The courtroom remained silent. Rourke closed his eyes, nodded slightly, as if he had anticipated this outcome from the beginning. Maddox lowered his head, hands clenched until his knuckles turned white, his expression wavering between fear and remorse. Neither of them spoke. The truth, with all its weight, had silenced any further defense. Outside the courtroom, independent legal organizations quickly released statements, calling the verdict an important step toward transparency in the justice system. But they also emphasized that this was just the beginning, that similar incidents were still occurring, and that true justice required more than a single ruling in a courtroom. As for Clarissa Whitmore, the woman who triggered the chain of events at Gate B12, the court imposed a $120,000 zero-cent civil penalty for filing a false report that led to an unlawful arrest. Additionally, Evelyn Monroe's civil lawsuit was officially accepted, paving the way for a separate legal case in the future. Clarissa did not attend the sentencing. Instead, she sent a short letter expressing regret over the consequences that followed. The letter, however, made no mention of personal responsibility. To many, it was a belated attempt to calm public backlash rather than a genuine apology. Meanwhile, on social media, one name continued to surface: Liam Tran, the young TikToker who had recorded the fateful video at Gate B12. At a public event hosted by Transparency Watch honoring courageous citizens, Liam stood on stage holding a certificate of recognition. Under the spotlight, he spoke with simple sincerity. I just did what anyone could do, hit record, and didn't look away. Behind him, a large screen displayed the image of Evelyn Monroe in her dark suit, walking between two officers, not as someone being led away, but as someone leading a movement for justice. At the post-trial press conference, Evelyn Monroe stood before dozens of microphones. Her eyes remained calm, just as they had been the day she walked into the courtroom as a witness. She spoke briefly, but every word carried the weight of a declaration. Justice isn't measured by years in prison. It's measured by how far a society is willing to face its own failures and learn to correct them. That statement spread quickly, quoted in news articles, shared across social media, repeated in millions of posts. It became a reminder that while verdicts matter, they are not the destination. Today's decision was just one milestone in a much longer journey, a journey demanding that an entire system look inward, acknowledge its wrongs, and commit to meaningful change. In that moment, as cameras panned across Evelyn's face and those standing behind her, it became clear the trial had ended, but the story of awakening, the awareness she had ignited, was only just beginning. It was not just the story of Evelyn Monroe, or of Rourke, Maddox, or Clarissa Whitmore. It was the story of a society learning to face its own wounds and vowing not to repeat them. 3 days after the sentencing, among the flood of thank-you notes, congratulatory cards, and speaking invitations from across the country, there was one small envelope, no return address. The handwriting was messy, childlike. Someone had placed it carefully on Evelyn Monroe's desk. She opened it. Inside was a piece of notebook paper, folded in quarters, written in blue ink, slightly slanted and uneven, but unmistakably clear. Dear Miss Evelyn, I'm the airport. I cried when I saw them take you. I thought they were going to hurt you. But then I saw you on TV, in court, and I understood. You weren't afraid. You were stronger than the people in uniform. Now, every time I walk past the police, I'm not scared anymore, because I think of you. You're the reason I know. Not everyone in uniform has the right to do wrong. Thank you for not staying silent. From a fifth-grade girl. Evelyn read the letter again and again. She didn't cry, but she placed her hand gently on the page, as if trying to hold on to the warmth of that young heart. She didn't need medals. She didn't need banners. She didn't need statues. She only needed one thing, that a child who once felt fear now believes in what's right. Friday afternoon, inside a modest community hall in the eastern part of the city, rows of plastic chairs were neatly arranged, and warm yellow light filled the space. On the podium, a simple sign read, "You knew, huh? Project launch. We will not be silent anymore." Evelyn Monroe stepped onto the stage to quiet, respectful applause. There was no background music, no flowers, just eyes, those of parents, students, teachers, and people who had once wanted to speak up but didn't know where to begin. "Today," she began, "we're not talking about the past to place blame. We're talking about to begin a future without fear." The UNMET Project is a community legal education program specifically designed for youth of color, where they learn how to understand the law, how to protect themselves, and most importantly, how to tell their own stories in a voice that is clear and confident. In the front row, a fifth-grade girl sat next to her mother, clutching a notebook and pen. She was the first to raise her hand when Evelyn asked, "Who wants to share something they once saw but never dared to speak about?" And that's how the story began, not with a court order, but with courage. At the end of the launch event, Evelyn stood in front of the project's banner and placed her hand over its official slogan. Justice doesn't wait for the brave, justice is built by them. In the soft light of day's end, a new generation began to raise its voice. And this time, they will never be silent again. There are moments that seem small, a glance, a sentence, an unexpected act, yet they hold the power to shake entire systems. The story of Evelyn Monroe is not just about a wrongful arrest or a viral video. It's a powerful reminder. We shouldn't judge others by appearance. Talent and dignity are not defined by skin color or status. Justice, when fueled by courage, always finds a way. We live in a world where silence, when prolonged, can become a form of complicity. But sometimes one TikToker hitting record, a child brave enough to write a letter, or a woman strong enough to stand her ground is all it takes to spark change. Have you ever been misunderstood just because someone didn't really know you? Have you ever been underestimated only to prove you're far stronger than they imagined? If so, then this story is yours too. Yes, and if it made you think, don't let it end here. Share it so someone else can wake up like you did. And if you want to keep following stories that inspire, don't forget to hit subscribe, because the truth deserves to be heard.